Recorded Books presents Big Breath In by John Straley. Narrated by Elisa Bresnahan. Prologue. Several years ago, just before the last presidential election and before the Portland homeless riots, a group of jurors walked out of a well-heated federal courtroom in Seattle after convicting a defendant of murder, kidnapping, and child trafficking. The small squadron of cops and social workers soon moved on to other complicated disasters. But the Seattle Times ran a profile, both in print and online, of the scientist Gumshoe, who had been instrumental in the case. The scientist Gumshoe, they said, had broken up a small child trafficking ring and was one of the few private investigators to have aided law enforcement since the dubious contribution of the Pinkertons during the labor wars of the 1920s. The profile outlined her career working out of Sitka, Alaska, alongside her late husband, a writer and investigator himself. Just above the fold in an article featuring a color photo with her and her husband, the paper noted that she was more unique and adventurous than the fictional characters her husband had created. Even in a cynical age, the paper also noted she had gone against type and had done her civic duty to a T. People who knew Delphine laughed at the characterization. It would have made Delphine laugh as well if she had read it, which, of course, she couldn't. Chapter 1. It was another day with a follow-up appointment. Delphine worked on her transfer memos in the morning. She wrote on an ironing board at the foot of her bed in the hotel room where she had been living across the street from the Seattle hospital. She hadn't been home to Alaska for 5 months. Her doctor appointments and infusions came often enough it wasn't worth traveling back. Insurance didn't pay for her flights, but it helped her cover the expense of the hotel. After the second month of treatment, she decided to write the memos for her students and colleagues to conclude the story of her research. Delphine intended for the memos to sound like a cross between a formal scientific paper and a well-researched article for a popular journal, not a personal memoir. There would be no graphs or tables. There would be nothing about cancer or grief. She wanted her words to have the voice of mature curiosity, which turned out to be a difficult tone to maintain. She had written 2 memos already, one for the humpback whales and one for the killer whales. But the memo that kept drawing her mind off into the shadowy gloom of her imagination was the one concerning the myriad unanswered questions about the sperm whales. She had been trying to develop a common thread, but she was still struggling with a thought she wanted to convey. How do animals with large brain mass and a high degree of dexterity within their dynamic environment develop strategies for getting what they want? Food, breeding opportunities, safety. She split the question into 2 parts. How could large-brained animals gain things they wanted, like feeding or breeding strategy? And how could they avoid the things they didn't want, like predators or having cancer? There it was again. Or having a dead partner at the time when she needed him most. Delphine wasn't happy with her efforts so far. Diving into the murky waters of judging another creature's intelligence tempted her scientist's mind toward solipsism. By the time she finished her 5th draft of the sperm whale memo and walked to her follow-up appointment, she had decided she wanted to stick with what she had seen, photographed and gathered in her 40 years of research. There was plenty there to consider. Outside, it was early summer, and songbirds fluttered in the plantings around the hospital. Through the open window of the examination room, she could barely make out the scent of Puget Sound, while the constant traffic thrummed from the freeway and cars honked intersections to life.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it. at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.